The iron scent of the alpha's fury was already choking the room, but it was the coldness of his fingers against my bruised skin that finally broke the dam inside me. I was still on my knees, a half-scrubbed floor beneath me and a line of my tormentors trembling before his wrath, but as the first growl left Alpha Cal's throat, something much older and more terrifying answered from mine. The servants' quarters were beginning to shake, and I realized with a jolt of panic that the Alpha hadn't just found his mate, he had just accidentally triggered an awakening that would level this entire palace. I wasn't always this hollowed-out version of a person. In my past life, I was a high-ranking executive who never bowed to anyone, but waking up in this world as a useless Omega meant trading my suits for rags and my voice for silence. For months, I played the part of the invisible servant, blending into the stone walls of this palace just to survive. But as the Alpha's gaze burns into mine, I realize my acting days are over. The power I've been suffocating since the moment I transmigrated is no longer asking for permission to come out. It's taking over. The first time I woke up in this body, I thought I was dying. Maybe I was. The ceiling above me wasn't the gray of my Manhattan apartment. It was stone, cold stone, with mold creeping along the cracks like veins. My chest hurt, my ribs hurt, even breathing hurt. I was Adrian Cole, 34, chief financial officer of a hedge fund nobody could pronounce. The last thing I remembered was a phone call I shouldn't have taken in the rain. Headlights coming around a corner too fast, the sound of metal twisting around me like a hand closing into a fist. Then this. A boy was staring down at me, thin, gaunt, eyes hollow as a starved animal. I tried to ask him who he was. The voice that came out wasn't mine. Too high, too hoarse, cracked from screaming I didn't remember doing. He flinched at the sound of it. Then he leaned closer.
Riven, if you wake up again, the headmaid's going to think you were faking the whole time. Get up, please. Riven. That was the name I was wearing now. Riven the useless. Riven the weak. The Omega who can't even shift. I learned the rest in pieces. The way a man learns he's drowning, one breath at a time. This was the Veil Pack, the largest wolf pack in the Northern Territories. Their palace, the Sablecrest, was carved into the side of a mountain like a wound that had been left open and bandaged with marble. Inside, there were three kinds of people: Alphas who ruled, Betas who served as soldiers and stewards, and Omegas who, if they were lucky, became mates and bore heirs. If they were unlucky, they became me. A useless Omega. That's what they called Riven. The original soul of this body had been the runt of a cold litter. No shift, no howl, no bond scent. To this pack, he wasn't even a person. He was a tool that walked on two legs and apologized too much. That first month, I tried to fight back. I argued with the headmaid about my workload. I demanded better food. I cited my education, my titles, my resume to people who didn't know the word resume meant. That ended the night 3 beta guards held me down on the kitchen floor, and a fourth one explained very calmly that the next time my mouth opened without permission, they would close it for me, permanently. That was the night I understood. This wasn't a corporate boardroom. There was no HR, there was no legal team to call. There was just a boy with broken ribs, lying on cold stone, learning that survival in this world meant unlearning every single thing that had made him a man in the last one. So, I stopped speaking unless I was spoken to. I stopped looking people in the eye. I learned how to scrub blood out of marble before the sun came up, because that's apparently what the night shift did when the Alphas got bored and one of the lower maids didn't make it back to her cot. I learned that the kitchen smelled like burnt grease and old fear. I learned that the Alpha, capital A, the one whose name was carved above every door in this palace, was called Kale. Kale of Vale. The youngest pack leader in 3 generations. They said he had killed a northern bear at 15 and a rival alpha at 17, and that he hadn't taken a mate yet because no Omega had ever been worth his time. And every night I went to sleep telling myself it was a good thing he didn't know I existed. Because if a man like that ever decided I was worth noticing, I was going to die of it. I saw him for the first time in the second month. I was on my knees polishing the long stone corridor outside the war room. A line of alphas swept past me in their long coats, and I kept my head down the way I had been trained, the way a dog learns to flatten itself against a wall. But something pulled my chin up anyway. He was the tallest one. That was the first thing I noticed. The tallest and the only one not talking. His coat was the color of dried blood, and the pin at his collar was a wolf's head with two crossed swords behind it. His face wasn't beautiful the way the songs about alphas always said it would be. It was just unmoved, like weather. He glanced down at me. It lasted half a second, maybe less. Then he was gone. And the corridor was empty, and I was on my knees with my heart hammering so hard against my ribs, I thought one of them might crack again. That wasn't pity. That wasn't recognition. That was the look a man gives a stone in the road that he almost tripped over. Don't make it more than it was, Adrian. Don't. But I did. For weeks, I made it more than it was. I caught myself listening for the sound of his boots in the corridors. I caught myself volunteering for chores that would put me in the wing of the palace where his office was. That was a lie I was very good at telling myself. The truth was that something inside me had recognized something inside him, and neither one of us understood it yet. The night I left the blanket on him, I had not planned it. I was on the late shift, emptying the wax catchers in the corridor sconces. His door was open. That alone was strange. The door to the Alpha's office was never open at that hour. But he had fallen asleep at his desk. His head was on his arm. There were maps spread out under him, and ink had bled onto his cuff, and even unconscious, his jaw was tight, like he was fighting someone in his dreams. He'll freeze. The stone in here holds cold like a grave. That's not your problem. He'll freeze. I argued with myself for almost a full minute. Then I went to the linen closet at the end of the hall, took the cleanest wool blanket I could find, and walked back into his office on feet so quiet I barely heard them myself. I laid the blanket over his shoulders the way you would cover a sleeping child. He did not stir, but the moment the wool settled against him, his face changed. The clenched jaw eased. The lines around his eyes softened. He breathed out, deep and slow, like he had been holding that breath for months. There. Now go. Before he wakes up, before he sees you, before this becomes a memory you have to carry. I went. I did not look back. The next morning, the corridor outside the kitchens smelled like rain and cedar smoke. I didn't understand why until I passed the boot rack at the side entrance and saw his coat hanging there. The bloody colored one, the one with the wolf and swords pin. And the wool of it carried a faint, beautiful scent I had never smelled on anything else in this palace. It smelled like the man I had been before I died. Like the office I had worked too many hours in. Like the rain on the night I stopped being Adrian Cole. Like home. That isn't possible. That isn't possible. But I stood there in the corridor for a long time with a rag in my hand and a bucket at my feet, and I let myself smell it. Just once. Just to remember what home was. That was the beginning of my problem, because once I had let myself want something, even something as small as a memory of rain, the dam in me started to leak. I could feel it. The thing I had been suffocating for months, the warm, restless, terrified thing curled up behind my ribs, stirred for the first time since I had woken up in this body. It was not a wolf yet, but it was no longer dead. The bullies started in the third month. There were 5 of them, 2 betas, 3 lower omegas, who had decided early on that the way to climb in this palace was to step on whoever was already at the bottom. The leader was a beta named Talon. She had a face like a hawk and a voice that liked to find soft places. It started with chores. Mine were already brutal. Riven had been doing the work of 2 servants for most of his short life, but Talon made a game of adding to them. A bucket of cold water accidentally knocked over on the floor I had just finished scrubbing. A tray of dishes accidentally set aside for me to wash after my shift had already ended. A stain on the headmaid's apron that must have happened while it was in my care. Then it stopped being chores. It was a shove in the corridor at first, then a tripped foot on the stairs, then a hand on the back of my neck in the pantry that held me still while another hand explained in a low voice meant only to me exactly what Talon would do to me if I told anyone. In another life, I had men like this fired with a phone call. In this life, I can't even raise my eyes to her. The worst part wasn't the bruises. I could hide bruises. I had hidden harder things in the other life. The worst part was the lies. Talon had figured out very early that the way to break me wasn't pain, it was Kale. The Alpha asked specifically for you to scrub the war wing tonight. I would scrub the war wing on my knees until they bled. He asked for me. He noticed me. He remembered. And the next day, Talon would laugh in the kitchen and tell the other betas that I had cleaned a whole wing on a lie, and they would laugh too, and the warmth I had carried home in my chest would freeze over again like a pond in February. The Alpha said he doesn't want to see you in the upper corridors anymore. He says you smell wrong. The Alpha said the next time you take more than 1 piece of bread at supper, you'll be sent to the borders. The Alpha said, the Alpha said, the Alpha said.
The Alpha didn't say any of it. I knew that, somewhere in the back of my brain where Adrian Cole still lived. The man whose office I had once stood in did not waste a single breath on a servant whose name he didn't know. But the boy whose body I was wearing, the boy who had grown up in this palace believing he was less than nothing, that boy listened to every word. And every word made the warm thing behind my ribs go a little colder. Maybe he did notice me. Maybe he noticed me long enough to be disgusted. Maybe the look in the corridor wasn't a stranger's look. Maybe it was a man recognizing a thing he had already decided wasn't worth recognizing. I went to bed with those thoughts. I woke up with those thoughts. I scrubbed the same floors twice some nights because between the bucket and the brush, I would forget what I was doing and just kneel there repeating Talon's lies in my head until they felt like my own. I saw Kale twice more in that month. Once in the corridor outside the war room again. He looked at me longer this time, maybe a full second. His brow furrowed just slightly, like a man trying to remember the name of a song he had heard on a long drive years ago. Then someone called his name, and he was gone. He looked. He looked longer. Stop. 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 The second time was in the courtyard. There had been a hunt. The Alphas were coming back with their kills slung over their shoulders, mud splashed up their boots, breath steaming in the cold. I was on the steps with a basket of bandages because the headmaid had told me to wait there in case anyone was hurt. Kale came in last. He wasn't hurt, but he stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at me, and this time the look lasted. I dropped my eyes. I had been trained to. But before I could turn away, I heard him take a breath. A deep one, the kind a wolf takes when it's trying to read the wind, and then I heard a sound in his throat that I had never heard an Alpha make before. It was almost a question. It was almost a name. Then Talon was at my elbow, snatching the basket away with a smile so sweet you could have spread it on bread, and she was telling Kale that the useless one was just there because no one else would take the job. And Kale's face went smooth again, and he walked past me into the palace without another word. He almost said something. He almost. Stop. He didn't. He didn't. He didn't. That night, I sat on my cot in the servants' dormitory with the bowl of cold porridge they had given me, and I did not eat it. I stared at the wall. I counted the cracks in it. I told myself over and over that the warmth behind my ribs was a fever, that the scent on his coat had been my imagination, that the look in the courtyard had been the look an Alpha gives a tool he is briefly curious about. I told myself I was a stone. I told myself stones do not feel the wind. I almost believed it.
Then the war drums started in the north. They were too far away to be heard inside the palace walls, but the kitchens heard everything. The kitchens always heard everything. I learned over the course of one long week of sweeping ash from the great hearths that the Northern Coalition, 3 packs that had been carving territory off each other for a decade, had finally stopped carving each other. They had agreed on a common enemy. They were moving south. They were moving toward us. I heard the headmaid telling one of the cooks, in a voice she meant to be quiet, that the Alpha was leaving every night now to ride the border, that he had not slept a full night in his own bed in 2 weeks, that the war room lights were on until the 3rd watch. I knew what that meant. It meant the next time I cleaned that corridor, the door to his office would be open again, and there would be a man asleep at his desk with ink on his cuff and a jaw set against something he couldn't see. I did not bring another blanket. I told myself I would not. I told myself the first one had been an accident, a soft impulse from the boy I had been before, and that the new Riven, the stone Riven, the silent Riven, had no business making the same accident twice. I held to that for 3 nights. On the 4th night, I brought him tea. I left it on the corner of his desk, in the cup I had washed twice in case my hands had been dirty. He was awake this time, with his back to me, hunched over a map. He did not turn around. But just before I reached the door, I heard his voice, quiet, lower than I had ever heard him speak, almost rough with tiredness. "Thank you." That was all. 2 words. I do not remember leaving the office. I do not remember the walk back to the servants' wing. I remember sitting on my cot a long time later with my hands shaking in my lap and trying to figure out why 2 words from a stranger had cracked something in my chest that 4 months of cruelty had not. Because they were the first kind words anyone has spoken to me in this body. Because he sounded tired. Because the warm thing behind my ribs heard them and sat up like a dog hearing its name for the first time. I did not sleep that night. I lay on my back in the dark and I listened to the warm thing breathing inside me, and for the first time since I had woken up in this body, I let myself wonder what it would do if I let it out. That was the night Talin decided I needed a real lesson. She came for me at the 3rd watch. I won't describe everything they did in the servants' quarters that night. I don't think I could, even if I wanted to. Some memories your brain wraps in cotton and shoves into a drawer it won't open again. What I can tell you is that there were 5 of them, and I was alone, and the floor was cold against my cheek, and at some point Talin crouched down beside my head and told me, very gently, the way you tell a child a bedtime story, that nobody would ever come for me. Not the headmaid. Not the other Omegas. Not the Alpha. Nobody. Because nobody knew I existed. That was the moment something cracked. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a scream. It was a small, quiet sound somewhere deep behind my ribs, like the first hairline fracture in a frozen lake. The warm thing I had been suffocating for 4 months opened one eye. And for the first time since I had woken up in this body, it looked back at me. You can let me out. You can let me out, and none of this happens to you ever again. I almost did. God help me, I almost did. My hand opened against the stone floor. My breath went deeper. The air in the room changed, heavier, hotter. Like the moment before a thunderstorm decides if it's going to break here or somewhere else entirely. Talin felt it. She drew back. The smile slipped a little off her face. That was when the door slammed open. The world tilted on its hinges. I could see Talin's mouth open in a startled curse before she remembered who was supposed to be standing in front of her, and then I could see all the color drain out of her face like water out of a broken cup. The other 4 were already scrambling. 2 were on their knees with their foreheads pressed to the stone before he had taken his second step into the room. The smell of urine cut through the air. Kael did not yell. That was almost worse. He stepped into the room one slow boot at a time, and the lamps shuddered in their brackets as he passed each one, and every beta and omega in that room seemed to forget how to breathe in the same instant. He was not the man I had seen in the corridor. The man in the corridor was a stone. This was the storm the stone had been keeping inside. His eyes never left me. He crossed the floor and went down on one knee. The alpha of the Veil Pack went down on one knee in the servants' quarters, and his hand, the same hand I had imagined and rebuilt in my head 100 times in the last 4 months, settled along the side of my face. His thumb brushed my jaw. It came away with a smear of my blood on it. His fingers are cold. Why are his fingers cold? He's shaking. He's shaking. The growl that left his throat then did not sound like a man. It sounded like a mountain making up its mind to fall on something. I heard one of the Omegas behind him whimper. I heard Talon try to speak. I heard a small, strange echo answer from inside my own chest, a low, deep sound, my voice and not my voice. And the floor under us shook hard enough to rattle the iron grate in the wall. Kale's head snapped up. He had felt it too. His pupils blew wide. The hand on my face moved, slid into my hair, cradled the back of my skull like he was afraid I would shatter under him. He inhaled, sharp and shocked, and I watched him put the pieces together in real time. The scent on his coat, the blanket on his shoulders, the tea on the corner of his desk, the boy on the steps with the basket of bandages. He knows. He knows. He knows. The room shook again. This time the windows cracked. I could feel it now, not behind my ribs, not curled up and quiet, but rolling up my spine like a tide that had finally remembered the moon. My fingers were burning, my teeth ached, the stone under my knees was glowing faintly gold where my blood had touched it, and I had no idea when I had started crying. Kale's voice, when it finally broke through the haze, was not the voice of an alpha giving orders. It was the voice of a man asking a question he was terrified to know the answer to. What is your name? Not a demand, not a command, a question. He doesn't know my name. After 4 months in his palace, after the blanket and the tea and the corridor and the courtyard, he doesn't know my name. And he's asking like the answer matters more than his own. I tried to give it to him. I tried. But the moment my mouth opened, the room shook a third time, harder than the first two, and a beam of gold light cracked up through the floorboards between us, so bright I had to close my eyes against it. The last thing I saw before everything went white was his face. Not afraid, not angry, awed. I woke up in his bed. I knew it was his before I opened my eyes because the sheets smelled like rain and cedar smoke, and the warm thing inside me, wider awake now, sitting up and stretching its long limbs, made a low, satisfied sound at the scent. Somewhere outside the room, a war horn was sounding. Long, 3 blasts, then 3 more. That's the border alarm. How do I know that's the border alarm? I sat up too fast. The room spun. There was a bandage on my temple I didn't remember getting, and a clean tunic on my body I didn't remember being put in. And somewhere in the back of my head, a voice that was not Adrian Cole's and not Riven's was telling me very calmly that the Northern Coalition had crossed the river 2 hours ago, and Kale was already gone. He was at the front. He had left me here. I should have been afraid. Instead, I was angry. He's at the front without me. Without me. The wolf inside me did not bother to answer. It just stood up the rest of the way, and the room got smaller, and the air got warmer, and the bandage on my temple slid off because the cut beneath it was already gone. The door opened. The headmaid was there. She was the woman who 4 months ago had stood by while 3 guards broke my ribs on a kitchen floor. She was the woman who 2 weeks ago had told Talon that useless Omegas didn't deserve clean water. She had a face like wet bread, and right now, that face was white. She tried to curtsy. I watched her hands shake. She knows. Whatever happened in the servants' quarters, she felt it from the kitchens. She knows what I am now. So does everyone in this palace. I got out of the bed. I did not speak. There was nothing I needed to say to her that the look on her face wasn't already saying for me. I walked past her into the corridor, and the 2 guards posted at Kale's door went to their knees the moment I stepped past them. One of them was weeping silently, and I did not stop to ask why.
The wolf inside me knew where Kale was. That was all I needed. I followed it out of the palace and into a snow that was just beginning to fall. The Northern Coalition had crossed the river with 1,200 soldiers and 7 werewolves the size of horses. I did not count them. The wolf did. By the time I reached the ridge above the battlefield, the first line of Vale warriors had already broken. The second line was breaking. I could see Kale's coat down at the front, the bloody-colored one, the one I had laid a blanket on. And there was a circle of bodies around him. And there was an arrow in his shoulder, and there were 3 of the giant northern wolves closing on him at once. I do not think the wolf thought either. We just stepped off the ridge together. The air changed shape around me as I fell. My bones did not break the way bones break in a fall. They unfolded, slow at first, then all at once, the way a hand unfolds from a fist that has been held too long. My ribs cracked outward and kept going. My spine lengthened. The skin along my back split, painlessly, and what came up out of it was not a wound. It was a wave of gold light, slow, patient, enormous, rolling out of me the way a sunrise rolls out of a horizon. The sound of it was the worst part. Or the best. I have not decided yet. It was a sound I had been making under my breath for 4 months in the servants' quarters and had never once let anyone hear. A long, low, gathering hum, the kind a bell makes the moment it is struck. The whole battlefield heard it. The Vale's soldiers in the second line stopped retreating. The coalition lines closest to the ridge stopped advancing. Even the snow seemed to hold still for a single suspended breath. Then I struck. I do not have good words for what I was. I was bigger than the northern wolves. I was bigger than the chapel at the back of the palace. My fur was the color of old gold, the deep drowned gold that lives at the bottom of a riverbed and remembers the kings that lost it there. When I drew breath, the air went into me and came back out shaped like sound. A howl that bent the trees on the ridge backward and rolled across the battlefield like a hand sweeping toys off a table. The 3 wolves around Kale flinched. That was the only chance I needed. The first one I took with my teeth. He was the largest of the 3, silver-black, scarred across the muzzle, the kind of werewolf the coalition packs only fed on the corpses of their own. He came in low the way they had been trained to come in low against an alpha. He had not been trained for me. I caught him at the shoulder and I closed my jaw, and the sound he made was very small for an animal his size. I dropped him in the snow. The second one tried to run. No, the wolf inside me made that sound. Not Adrian, not Riven, not even the boy on the kitchen floor. Something older. Something that remembered being a king once and had not forgotten what to do with men who hurt the things it loved. I caught him before he had taken 3 strides. I did not bite this time. I just put one paw across his back, and the snow under him turned red without any help from me at all. The third one stopped where he stood. He was the one Kale had been fighting. The arrow in Kale's shoulder had come from him. I could smell it on him. Iron and ash and a stranger's pack scent, fresh and sharp. And the wolf inside me did the thing wolves do when they are deciding whether to forgive a creature for being born. He decided no. I do not remember the bites. I do not remember the breaking. I remember the snow turning red in patches as wide as cottages. I remember the coalition line bending and breaking and beginning to run. I remember the war horn behind me changing its rhythm to something the Vale soldiers had never heard before in their lives, because no hornkeeper in 3 generations had needed to sound the call for victory while the battle was still happening. I remember stopping. I remember turning. The battlefield had gone quiet behind me in the way a forest goes quiet when something larger than the forest has walked into it. Soldiers on both sides were lowering their weapons without being told. Some were on their knees. A few were weeping. One of the Vale captains had taken off his helmet and was holding it against his chest like a man in a church he had not known he believed in. I did not see any of them, really. I saw Kale.
He was still on his knees in the red snow where I had left him. The arrow was still in his shoulder. He had not pulled it out. He had not moved at all. He was just looking up at me, the way you look up to the dome of a great hall the first time you walk into it as a child. He was not afraid. I want to be very clear about that, because I have replayed this moment in my head 1,000 times since. He was kneeling, and his shoulder was bleeding, and there was a wolf the size of a chapel standing over him with my eyes in its head, and he was not afraid. He reached up, slowly, with the hand that wasn't pinned by the arrow. His fingers shook on the way up, not from cold this time, not from fear, but from something the wolf inside me recognized at once. It was the same shake that had been in his hand when he cradled my skull on the servants' floor. The shake of a man whose body has finally caught up to what his bones already knew. His hand, the same cold hand from the servants' quarters, the same hand that had cradled the back of my skull, settled against my muzzle. He pressed his forehead to it. His breath was warm against the fur. I felt his voice through my whole body when he finally spoke. There you are. He found me. After all of it, he found me. We found each other. The wolf inside me lowered its head into his hand, and I closed my eyes. And the snow kept falling, and somewhere on the ridge above us, the surviving Vale soldiers were beginning to sing. It was a song I had never heard before in this life. I knew every word. I shifted back inside a tent. He had carried me into it. I have no memory of becoming small again, only of being held, of the strange embarrassed warmth of waking up bare under a cloak that smelled like him, with his hand still in my hair, like he had not let it go for the entire ride back from the river. He was looking at me the way a man looks at a sunrise he does not believe he is allowed to be alive for. I was looking at him like I was afraid I would not be allowed to stay. He's the alpha. I was a servant. None of what happened on that field changes the rules of this palace. Does it? His thumb moved slowly along my temple, where the cut had been hours ago. He spoke very quietly. What is your name? The second time he had asked, both times like the answer mattered more than his own. I told him. Not all at once. He had to ask. The first thing he asked was whether the body I was in had ever been mine to begin with. I told him no, that the boy who had grown up in the Sable Crest had died in this body 4 months ago, on a night nobody had noticed, and that what had woken up in his place had been a man from a world Kale had never heard of and was never going to see. He did not flinch. His thumb did not stop moving along my temple. That's not the answer most men get when they ask a question like that. Most men flinch. The second thing he asked was my real name, not Riven, not the name the servants had used, the one I had been answering to before I died. I told him. I had not said it out loud in this world, not once. It sounded strange in this tent, in this voice, in this body, like a coat that no longer fit at the shoulders, but he turned it over carefully on his tongue, the way a man turns over a small breakable thing he has just been handed and is not sure he is allowed to keep. He did not use it. He just nodded once, slow, like he had been told a secret he intended to guard with the rest of his life. Then I told him the rest. About Tamlin, the lies, the pantry floor, the bowl of porridge I had not eaten, and the wall I had counted the cracks in. The corridor, the courtyard. The second time he had almost spoken to me, and the third time, and the first. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. When I was done, he closed his eyes for a long moment, and his jaw did the thing it had done in his sleep. Tight, set, fighting someone in his own head. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet, and I do not think he had noticed. They used my name to hurt you. Yes, they used my name because they knew I was too busy to hear you. Yes, that ends today. I felt it then, the way it must have felt when the original Riven had heard kindness for the first time, A small, stupid, stubborn warmth in the middle of my chest, where the wolf was now curled around the part of me that was still just a man. He did not promise to love me. He did not keep me. What he promised was much harder than either of those, and much more honest. From now on, you do not answer to them. You answer only to me. And his voice caught just for a second on something I could not name. I answer to you. I did not have words for him. I did not need them. I just lifted my hand, slow, careful, brave, and laid it over the one of his that was still in my hair, and I held it there until our breathing matched. That was the closest either of us came that night. It was enough. It was, somehow, more than enough. The trials happened a week later. I will not pretend I did not enjoy them. Tamlin was stripped of her rank in front of the full pack. The 2 betas who had held me down in the pantry were sent to the northern outposts, where the winters do not forgive anyone, and where the wolves that howl in the dark do not howl in any language a vile soldier would recognize. The other 3 were given the kind of work Riven had been given: cold floors, long shifts, late hours, and made to do it with their faces uncovered so that everyone who passed them in the corridors would know exactly who they had been and exactly what they had done. Cale did not raise his voice through any of it. He did not need to. I sat at his right hand on the dais, and I did not wear servant's clothes. I did not wear an Omega's veil. I wore a coat the color of old gold because the seamstresses had begged through the night to make it for me, and because the wolf inside me had agreed with a low, pleased sound when they held it up against the light. Talon would not look at me. I made sure I looked at her. I am not the boy you broke in the servants' quarters. I am the thing that woke up because of what you did. Remember that. Every cold morning, in every long winter for the rest of your shortened life. Remember that the next time you look at someone you think is weak. She lasted about 6 seconds. Then her eyes hit the floor and they stayed there. I did not feel guilty. I do not think I will ever feel guilty. I had spent 4 months learning how to swallow my voice for people like her. I was not going to spend a single day pretending I was sorry to have it back. The headmaid came to me a few days after the trials. She came alone. She did not bring the wet bread expression she wore in the kitchens. She wore something smaller, older, that looked almost like the woman she might have been before she'd decided that survival in this palace meant choosing the loudest side of every cruelty. She did not ask for forgiveness. I respected her slightly for not asking. She just said very quietly that she had served 3 pack leaders in her life, and that she had seen Omegas come and go, and that she had never seen the corridors of the Sablecrest hold their breath the way they did now when I walked through them. Then she bowed. It was the deepest bow I had ever seen a beta give an Omega in this world. I did not bow back. I did not need to. I just looked at her until she straightened up again, and I told her in a voice that surprised even me with how steady it had become. You are still the headmaid of this palace. You will run it well. If there is ever a child in the servants' wing with bruises again, you will come to me before the Alpha does. Do we understand each other? She understood. She has been a much better headmaid since. The first night I slept in his bed without a fever or wound, he asked me, very carefully, if I wanted to stay. I told him I wanted to stay. I did not tell him about everything I wanted under that staying. There was time. There would be time. The wolf inside me was patient now, in a way it had not been in the servants' quarters, and so was I. He laid his hand over mine on the blanket between us. He did not move it for the rest of the night. That was all that night was. That was all it needed to be. In the morning, the pack would call me consort. The Northern Territories would learn my name and learn to be careful of it. The coalition would not cross the river again in my lifetime, or in my children's, if I ever chose to have any. Adrian Cole, somewhere very far away, in a city that no longer existed for me, would be officially declared dead. I did not care about any of that yet.
I cared that the man beside me was warm. I cared that he had asked my name twice. I cared that, for the first time since I had woken up in this body, I was no longer pretending to be a stone. I was a wolf. I was a mate. I was, finally, and with all the gold light I had spent 4 months keeping under my ribs, awake. The end.